Okay, it's time to discuss my taste in television. I've mentioned before that I've actually seen comparatively few TV shows, especially compared to how many movies I've seen, so this list is by no means definitive. There are tons of reputedly great shows that I just haven't taken the time to watch from the beginning, like Criminal Minds, Samurai Jack, The Sopranos, The Twilight Zone, and many, many others. I'll get to them eventually, but I'm here today to present my list of favourites as it stands at this particular time. Now, this list has had quite a history. It was originally just a standard top 10, but I came up with so many runners-up that I thought I might as well extend it to a top 20. Then I decided that out of the lower 10, I only really felt an affinity for the top 5, which narrowed it down to a top 15. Then I realised that 5 of those 15 were documentaries, and it just didn't feel right to combine them with the fictional shows, so I ended up separating them into their own top 5. I do watch a few quiz/game shows, but I've decided to discount them here, anything that involves audience/public interaction. So for what it's worth, here are the current lists of my favourite TV shows. First, my top 5 favourite documentaries, which I should point out I'm generally not that into unless they're covering a subject that I'm particularly interested in. See if you can tell what my choice subject is. Number 5. Walking with Beasts, aka Walking with Prehistoric Beasts. We'll get to its predecessor Walking with Dinosaurs later, but this sequel series does the same thing for the magnificent prehistoric mammals just as well. It came out just as I was turning 13, so it was the obsession of my teenage years. It introduced me to many prehistoric animals I might never have heard of otherwise. The CGI isn't quite as convincing as in Walking with Dinosaurs, but it is a lot more ambitious since most of the animated characters are covered in feathers or fur. If you think dinosaurs were the only spectacular prehistoric animals that ever lived, give this series a watch. Number 4. Predators. It's a 6-episode miniseries from the BBC that analyses the ways in which predators catch their prey. I've always been fascinated by animals, so this was one of my favourite series as a child. A lot of the Predator's secrets are only revealed through advanced camera techniques, like a polarized light camera to represent cuttlefish vision. It just goes to show how totally bizarre the natural world can be, with creatures like the star-nosed mole, the ladder-web spider, and dragonfly nymphs with extendable jaws. Also, the music is just fantastic, giving it more of an identity than I've seen from any other documentary. Number 3. Dinosaur Secrets, aka Jurassic Fight Club. Originally titled Jurassic Fight Club in the US, but for some reason they changed the title to Dinosaur Secrets in the UK. This 12-episode miniseries recreates prehistoric battle scenes based directly on the fossil evidence. The main reason this makes my list is because it reawakened the dinosaur fanatic in me that had lain dormant for a while, bursting with giddy childish joy. In some ways, it exceeded my expectations, especially in that it has the best Albertosaurus design I've ever seen. I'm certain that if I'd been a child when this show came out, I would have absolutely worshipped it. Number 2. Top Gear. I never watched the show's original run, which began in the 70s. I'm going purely by the 2002 relaunch here. Now, I'm just going to say it straight out, I don't care about cars. At all. Any car specs that are brought up in this show always go right over my head. But the 3 hosts for me are what makes it worthwhile. The way Jeremy Clarkson, Richard Hammond, and James May work off each other is utter comedic gold. So it only figures that the show itself has a very comedic spin, with all sorts of wacky challenges to put cars through their paces. And my number 1 favourite documentary series is Walking with Dinosaurs. Yeah, you knew this was coming. When I was a child, this is probably the series you'd find me watching most often. It was groundbreaking, not just for its cutting-edge CGI, which sort of did for TV what Jurassic Park did for movies, but because it was one of the first shows to fully immerse you in the world of the dinosaurs by presenting it as a standard nature documentary. I always loved how distinct the 6 episodes were from each other, with an entirely different ecosystem being portrayed in each environment, be it the harsh Triassic world or the Jurassic fern prairies reminiscent of the African grasslands. The music is simply incredible, and I love how you can identify each episode by the score alone. Even though some of the information presented has become ridiculously outdated, particularly the size of Liopleurodon, it's still my gold standard for dinosaur documentaries, and the nostalgia factor alone makes it by far my favourite. Runners up. Art Attack, I think, can transcend the kids' show sensibility and appeal to anyone who's in any way artistically inclined. The Blue Planet presents the oceans in some spectacular ways, particularly the depths. The vast abyssal plain is an image I'll never forget. Dinosaur Planet, not to be confused with Planet Dinosaur, was the first to convince me how good feathered raptors could look, but that alone isn't enough for a spot on the list. The Life of Mammals, in typical David Attenborough fashion, is a fascinating watch packed with memorable moments, like when he amusingly demonstrates a sloth's slow reactions. Planet Earth is the ultimate overview of the natural world, showcasing a different environment in each episode. And Prehistoric Planet is essentially Planet Earth with dinosaurs, featuring some of the absolute best CGI I've ever seen. And now onto the main list, the works of fiction. Number 10, Futurama. It's Matt Groening's follow-up to The Simpsons, and in my opinion, it blows its predecessor out of the water. It's incredibly funny, which is about all you could ask for in a comedy, but the ingenious writing provides so much more than that. Its futuristic setting opens up limitless creative possibilities. It mocks everything from science fiction to narrative conventions to pop culture in general, showcasing how much has changed in 1,000 years, but also how little. Not every episode is gold, there are some duds, but also some deeply touching and even tear-jerking ones that demonstrate how attached you are to the characters. Number 9, Death Note. Light Yagami is a teenager who finds a supernatural book that allows him to kill anyone whose name he writes in it. He decides to use it to wipe out criminals and create a crime-free society. It's a fantastic premise that makes you wonder if you'd do the same thing with that kind of power. But its main driving force is the rivalry between Light and the mysterious detective L. It's a deadly game of cat and mouse, with both sides convinced that they represent justice. I love the various schemes and tricks they devise against each other, including some ingenious long games. Number 8, Breaking Bad. What can I possibly say about Breaking Bad without parroting what everyone else has already said about it? I'm sure you've heard it analysed to death, but what I like about it is harder to put my finger on. I think it mainly boils down to how utterly real it feels at all times. Nothing feels forced or contrived, and it makes you wonder how you'd react in such extreme situations. The characters are all unforgettable, and my absolute favourite is Jesse Pinkman. It is undeniably an excellent show, but I can't proclaim it the greatest of all time like everyone else does. Number 7, Blackadder. This is probably Rowan Atkinson's most famous role along with Mr. Bean. What makes the character of Blackadder so funny is not just his sarcastic attitude, but the fact that he's always far smarter than his superiors. You can identify with his frustration. Each series takes place in a different time period, and the set design is always right on the mark. The whole franchise is simply one of the classiest, most dignified, and obviously funniest comedies I've ever seen. If you were to ask me which is my favourite series, it's a toss-up between the second and the third. Number 6, The Big Bang Theory. I know this show gets a lot of flack for perpetuating harmful stereotypes, but I can't help but love it. Not only is it funny, but something about the discussions of sci-fi and comic books makes me jump for joy just to hear them, even if I don't always get the references. The characters are all fun enough to keep the show fresh, but I especially love Sheldon and the humour that springs from how unemotional and socially awkward he is. Maybe I see a lot of myself in him. In short, this is another show that makes me giddy with childish joy. Number 5, Gravity Falls. This show actually embodies that childish joy I just mentioned. Everything about it is imbued with childlike glee and innocence. It's mainly the humour that stands out to me. The jokes are so fast, so clever, and so lively that it's hard to stop laughing before the next one. But it's not pure comedy. Every episode hints at a grand mystery behind the town's supernatural phenomena, and it's peppered with powerful moments that develop the characters, which of course reach their apex towards the end. The result is endlessly endearing characters, my favourite being the ever-optimistic Mabel, and an expertly developed overarching narrative. Number 4, Game of Thrones. Another one that needs no introduction. I have 4 main reasons for loving it so. One is the outstanding opening theme. Another is the setting, combining fantasy elements with very human struggles and political intrigue. One of its defining features is the ingenious ways it defies fictional traditions, best summed up in the infamous Red Wedding massacre. But above all, I love the characters, who are among the most layered and fascinating ever. Plus, it's the only instance I can think of where a show has actually overtaken the books it's based on. It's just a shame the last 2 series went severely downhill. Number 3, Batman the Animated Series. This show is just incredible. It's the perfect screen version of Batman because as it's not limited to a movie's time frame, it really encompasses everything that's so cool about the Batman universe, and it nails every aspect. In particular, the villains are handled just as well as the turmoil of Batman himself. They're equally 3-dimensional characters. On top of that, it's just mind-blowing how perfectly it all balances the line between being mature enough for adults and still remaining child-friendly. It can be watched and loved at any age. Everything about this show rules. To me, it will always be the ultimate incarnation of Batman. Number 2, CSI New York. I'm a big fan of mystery stories, especially police dramas like the CSI franchise. Most people seem to prefer soaking up the sun in CSI Miami, but I've always found New York infinitely more charming. The cases get so over the top that even if it's not realistic, they still stick in your head. But by far my favourite aspect of CSI New York is the characters. They all simply bring a smile to my face, including of course Gary Sinise in his role of a lifetime. It never ceases to amaze me how the CSI writers could keep churning out inspired material like this non-stop. And my number 1 favourite TV show is Avatar: The Last Airbender, aka Avatar: The Legend of Aang. I'm not sure I can adequately describe what an extraordinary work of genius this show is. First and foremost, the characters are completely irresistible, particularly Zuko, whose journey is so fascinating that he's easily one of my favourite characters ever created. The world it invents is so meticulously detailed that it's beyond impressive. I'm surprised that's the first thing I think of with enthusiasm, because with a lot of acclaimed fiction, I often find there's a disconnect between artistry and likability. They're more fun to analyse than to actually watch. Avatar, however, is that rare example that's just as enjoyable as it is impressive. In fact, I'd say its ingenuity and personality complement each other impeccably. In that respect, it embodies its central theme of balance. It's a flawless mix of kid-friendly and mature, glee and severity, action and philosophy. In short, it's one of the best family shows you could possibly ask for, and a worthy choice for my absolute favourite show ever. And don't even get me started on what a miserable failure The Last Airbender movie was. Runners-up, Animaniacs is an affectionate tribute to the golden age of classic Warner Brothers cartoons. Fawlty Towers is not always funny, but is uproarious when it is, thanks in no small part to the short-tempered nature of Basil Fawlty himself. Friends is a funny and relatable showcase of following 6 characters through growing up. The Legend of Korra, while not quite as solid as its predecessor Avatar, is still rich in the same fantastic characterization and breathtaking animation. Mr. Bean is a great modern silent comedy, with a lot of the humour stemming from the character coming up with inventive ways around trivial problems. Primeval is an exciting and intriguing story of prehistoric creatures escaping into the present. The 3rd series is terrible, but it escalates again in the 4th and 5th. The Spectacular Spider-Man is probably the best iteration of Spider-Man ever. I do wish it hadn't been cancelled, especially given how Series 2 ends. Superman the Animated Series, again, is my favourite version of the character. While I love the Richard Donner movies, I never had much respect for Superman until I saw this show. The Transformers is Transformers, what more can you say? The classic show is far more fun than the Michael Bay abominations. And Wolf's Reign is a sublime quest story that fully embodies the desperate sadness of a world nearing its end, particularly in the last few episodes.